in June of 1941, a German gunner near Rasinai laid his sight on the front of a Soviet tank at 400 yards and fired his best round straight into it. The shell struck clean. It skipped off the sloped plate and howled away into the trees. He loaded and fired again. It bounced again. The tank did not stop, did not turn, did not so much as slow down. That tank was the T-34. On paper, it was the finest medium tank in the world that summer. It carried nearly 2 inches of armour set at a steep angle, so a shell that hit it did not bite in. It slid off. Mounted a 76mm gun that could open up a German tank from twice the distance the German could shoot back. It ran on a diesel engine and rolled on wide tracks that floated over mud where lighter machines sank to the belly. By every number that fits on a specification sheet, it should have chased the German army back across the border. By the first snow, it was mostly gone. More than half of the T-34s the Soviets lost that summer were never touched by a German gun. This is the story of how 965 Panzer IIIs, worse on paper in every category a soldier cares about, beat Stalin's better tank in the summer of 1941. The armour was real, and so was the gun. What went wrong was inside the turret, and it had almost nothing to do with steel. The man who built it never saw it fight. Mikhail Koshkin drew the T-34 in a factory in Kharkov, and in January of 1940 he was ordered to prove it. Not on a test track. He drove 2 prototypes 1,200 miles across frozen country from Kharkov to Moscow to show them to the Kremlin, then turned around and drove them home. The roads were ice and broken mud. Somewhere on that drive, Koshkin caught a chill that turned into pneumonia. Surgeons took out a ruined lung, and it did not save him. He was dead by September, 41 years old, before a single one of his tanks fired a shot in anger, and Alexander Morozov and Nikolai Kucherenko finished the work he had started. What they finished was a marvel. The Germans found that out at 400 yards. Their standard 37mm anti-tank gun bounced off it so reliably, the crews gave the gun a bitter nickname, the door knocker, because all it did was knock and announce you were there. The short 50mm gun on most of their tanks was not much better against the front plate. A German tank commander who met a T-34 head-on in June of 1941 had, on the numbers, already lost. There was even a small mercy built into the Soviet tank that the Germans lacked. The T-34 ran on diesel, which does not catch fire as easily as the gasoline the German tanks drank. One more column, in which the Soviet machine was simply ahead. It did not save the campaign either, because a tank that will not burn still will not fight if its crew cannot see, cannot speak, and cannot force a jammed gear. So why did the numbers lie? Climb inside the turret and you find the first answer. The T-34 crammed only 2 men into its turret, and one of them was the commander. He was also the gunner. In the middle of a firefight, he had to find the target, lay the gun on it, fire it, and at the same time keep watch on the whole battlefield and tell the rest of his platoon what to do. 4 jobs. 1 man. When he pressed his eye to the gun sight to aim, his view of the world shrank to a narrow tube, a soda straw slit of battlefield with everything else blacked out. The Panzer III was no wonder weapon, and that is the point. It was the German workhorse, more than a third of every tank that crossed the border that June. It was well made, well run, and utterly ordinary next to the Soviet machine on the numbers that get printed in a book. Its whole advantage was that it was built around its crew instead of on top of them. Now climb into the Panzer III. 5 men. 3 of them in the turret. The commander sat up high with his own hatch and his own vision, and he did exactly one thing. He watched and he commanded. He did not touch the gun. A gunner laid the shot. A loader fed the breech. The commander's whole mind was free to see the German tank 50 yards to his flank and the Soviet tank creeping up the gully, and to react to both before the Soviet commander had finished aiming his first round. Put those 2 turrets side by side in a real fight, and the gap is brutal. German crews reported that they could fire 3 rounds for every 1 round a T-34 sent back. 3 shots to your 1. It did not matter that the Soviet shot hit harder. A tank that shoots first and shoots 3 times as often does not need the better gun. It needs to hit you before you hit it, and the Panzer III did again and again. Then there was the silence. Most T-34s in the summer of 1941 had no radio at all. Only about 1 tank in 5 carried one, and that one was the platoon leader's. Everyone else followed him by watching. He waved a flag from his hatch, and the tanks behind him tried to copy what he did. That works on a parade ground. It falls apart the instant the shooting starts, when there is smoke and noise and the flagman is buttoned up because a machine gun is raking his cupola. A Soviet tank company went into battle half blind and half deaf, each tank fighting its own small private war, nobody able to say, look left or pull back, or they are behind us. Every single Panzer III had a radio. Everyone. A German company moved like a hand, fingers spreading and closing on order, concentrating on a weak point the moment the commander spotted it. When a German officer saw an opening, he could put 10 tanks onto it in under a minute. The Soviet officer beside him could see the same opening and had no way on earth to tell his tanks to take it. He owned the better weapon and could not aim the thing that mattered, which was all of them at once. The eyes were bad too. When the Germans later got their hands on captured T-34s and tried fighting from inside them, they found something they could hardly believe. Their own gunners, men who could reliably hit a target from a Panzer IV, saw their accuracy fall away the moment they climbed into a T-34 and looked through Soviet glass. The vision blocks were cloudy. The sights fogged. Key Soviet optics factories had been torn up and moved east ahead of the German advance, and the lenses that came out the other end were poor. So the Soviet crew was overloaded, mute, and now half blind on top of it, squinting through a dirty window at a target the Germans saw clean. The turret itself was a trap in close country. It sat low and cramped, and the gun could only tip down about 3 degrees. That sounds like nothing. On a battlefield, it is everything. It meant a T-34 could not sit behind the crest of a hill, nose down, and fire at what was below it. To shoot down a slope, it had to roll its whole hull over the top and expose its belly, the one place the armour was thin. The Panzer III could hold down and pick its shots. The T-34 had to stand up in the open to take them. And the machine kept breaking. The early T-34 had a crude transmission that tore itself apart under hard use. Soviet crews learned to carry a heavy hammer in the fighting compartment. When a gear jammed and would not shift, the loader leaned out of his seat and beat the transmission with the hammer until it gave. Some crews drove into battle with spare gears lashed to the outside of the tank because they expected to change one before they got home. The air filter choked on dust. The engine wore out fast. A tank that spends the campaign in a repair pit is not on the battlefield, and the T-34 spent a great deal of that first summer in the repair pit or on the side of the road. There was also the simple problem of how few of them there were. In all of 1940, the Soviets had built only 183 T-34s, and by the time the Germans crossed the border, the whole force amounted to somewhere around 1,200 good tanks, split between two factories. Those precious machines were sprinkled thin through mechanized units rather than gathered into an armoured fist, and most of those units were filled out with thousands of worn-out light tanks from the early 1930s. So a T-34 rarely fought alongside other T-34s. It fought alone, one superb tank swallowed in a crowd of thin-skinned older machines that the Panzer IIIs and the smaller German guns swept aside with ease. When even the 50mm guns failed against the front of one, the Germans reached for the one weapon that would not. They dragged the 88mm anti-aircraft gun down off its high mounting, levelled the long barrel flat, and fired it at tanks. It was built to shoot down bombers. Against the T-34, the Germans pressed it into the anti-tank role, because nothing smaller could be trusted to do the job. That choice is a confession all by itself. To stop the better tank, they had to bring an anti-aircraft gun to the front line and use it as a sniper's rifle against armour. Behind all of that stood the worst problem of all, and it was not the tank's fault. It was the men. Stalin's purges had gutted the Red Army's officer corps a few years earlier, and the tank crews of 1941 were green. Many drivers had only a few hours behind the levers before they were sent into combat. They did not know how to nurse the engine, how to read the ground, how to keep the beast running. A brilliant tank in the hands of a crew that has never learned it is just a heavy target that shoots slowly. One Soviet mechanized corps rolls forward to counterattack, and every one of these failings arrives with it. It has no radios to coordinate the punch, so the tanks arrive in dribs and drabs instead of one fist. It has almost no recovery vehicles, so every tank that throws a track or drinks its fuel dry is simply left where it dies, and there were hundreds of those. It has crews who cannot see well, cannot talk to each other, and cannot fire fast. And it runs into a German force that does all of those things easily. The result was a rout. A fast, well-drilled team took apart a stronger man who had been blindfolded and told to fight with one arm. The numbers of the collapse are stunning. Across 1941, the Red Army lost something on the order of 20,500 tanks. Of those, around 2,300 were T-34s, the best machine on the field. But look closer at how they went. At least half of all those tank losses that summer came, not from German fire but from breakdown, from empty fuel tanks, from tanks bogged in mud and abandoned because no one could drag them out. The Germans did not have to destroy the T-34. Much of the time, the T-34 destroyed itself, and the crew walked away from a machine that still had 2 inches of good armour and a full rack of shells. There were moments that summer when the Soviets got it right, and those moments terrified the Germans. In October, near the town of Mtsensk on the road to Moscow, a colonel named Mikhail Katukov did the one thing the doctrine had been missing. He hid. He tucked his brigade of T-34s into the tree lines and let a German panzer column drive straight into the trap. Then he hit it from the flanks at close range, where the German guns could not answer and the Soviet armour held. The German advance stalled. Heinz Guderian, one of the fathers of the whole panzer idea, went to look at what had happened, and what he saw shook him. He wrote back to Berlin demanding that Germany stop and copy the T-34, gun, armour, sloped plate and all. A German investigation team came out that November, crawled over captured T-34s and reached the same verdict. The enemy's tank was better than theirs. The Germans knew that T-34 was the superior machine, almost from the first week they met it. Their own general said so in writing. And they beat it anyway, all through that summer and into the autumn, because a tank is not just a gun and a slab of armour. A tank is a crew that can see, a crew that can talk, a crew that can shoot 3 times before the enemy shoots once, and a whole army built to bring those crews to the right place at the right moment. The Panzer III had all of that. The T-34 had almost none of it yet. The word yet matters. Every flaw in that first summer T-34 was fixable, and the Soviets fixed them one by one. They put a radio in every tank. They enlarged the turret and gave the commander a cupola of his own so he could finally just command. Eventually they built a bigger turret with a 3rd man in it, the T-34-85, and the commander stopped being the gunner. They improved the transmission and the filters. The gun and the armour, the parts that were already the best in the world, they left alone. And the tank that had thrown itself away by the roadside in 1941 became the tank that rolled into Berlin in 1945. But that was later. In the summer of 1941, the ledger was cruel and clear. 965 Panzer IIIs, thinner skinned and smaller gunned, beat a better tank because 5 trained men who could see and speak will beat 2 overloaded men squinting through fogged glass every single time. Go back to that German gunner near Rasinai, watching his best shells skip off the Soviet armour and howl into the trees. He was right to be afraid of that tank. It was better than his. But somewhere behind the wheel of it was one man doing the work of 4, with no radio to call for the tanks that might have saved him, in an engine that might not start again if he ever got the chance to run. The armour held. The gun was deadly. And none of it was enough. The T-34 did not lose the summer of 1941 to a better machine. It lost it to 2 men doing 5 men's work in a cramped turret, with 1 radio in 5 and a hammer where a good gearbox should have been.